Welcome, everyone. I am so excited that you're here tonight to help us send Heartspeak into the world. Uh, Joining me today are two dear friends, and I'd like to introduce you to them today. First, Parker Palmer is joining us, friend, educator, author, activist, all around amazing human, and the reason that the book is coming to the world today. And also another dear friend of ours, Carrie Newcomer, who's a singer, songwriter, and poet, lovely human, and has offered to be our moderator, facilitator today. So welcome to both of you.
Great to be here. Um, I am so delighted and honored to be part of this wonderful event. Thank you to Sherrill and Parker for inviting me to add a few questions to the conversation tonight. Um, I have been so excited about this project ever since I first heard about it. Let Your Life Speak is one of my desert island books. Um, and has profoundly moved me personally. And I love this new collection of meditations and reflections, graphic illustrations based upon the book. Sherrill, I just want to celebrate and really lift up this powerful new expression of your own thoughts and graphic interpretations of Let Your Life Speak. Heart Speak is truly lovely.
Thank you, Carrie. It's just so delightful to just be in
I,
this
I second
collaboration.
that, heartily second that.
Um, okay. I could easily talk for like a couple more hours about how awesome I think both of you are. That would be not a problem. But let's on to the book and start with a few questions. Are you up for that?
I'm game. Are you, Parker?
I sure am.
Okay. Well, um, this wonderful book, Heart Speak, um, it's a combination of reflections, meditations, questions, and graphic illustrations. Can you tell me, Sherrill, about the origins of your interest in graphic recording and illustration? You maybe even explain a little bit to people, what you see graphic illustration and recording being.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So my interest, I've always been a doodler and drawer in the margins of books that I read or really anywhere. And the origins of the book came twofold, a little bit from that, just always being a drawer. And I had started a drawing practice after I had taken a course that actually was because of wanting to be a graphic recorder. The course was called How to Become a Rock Star Scribe, which who wouldn't want to take that course? And after the course, there was a cohort of us who took the course. And after the course, one of the women reached out and said that she had found this daily drawing or December drawing uh, exercise and wanted to know if any of us wanted to join her in drawing for every day in December. And the only rule was you had to draw something every day, could be anything, and then post online. What it was kind of low stakes, low pressure. And so at that point, I had not been doing a lot of my own art. So I decided, well, I could probably draw for the 31 days of December. So I started in, and then in January, a few people dropped off, but she said, does anybody want to keep going? And I did. And then February, more people dropped off, but I kept going. And it was really just one at a time. It turned into this just really beautiful morning drawing practice for me with a cup of coffee. And I'm an early riser. And soon enough, little steps add up to a lot of stuff. And I had built this drawing practice and it had filled, 20 some sketchbooks. Uh, so that was the drawing practice. But then my graphic recording, it came out of that a little bit as well because it was also a practice in listening. The morning meditations were a practice in listening to myself and what was resonating with me in the morning, finding a quote. And graphic recording was listening to a group and what was generative for them and what was coming to the surface for them. So listening has always been really important to me. And so the book rose from, like you said, Parker's book, Let Your Life Speak, is such a touchstone for me. And I actually, the copy that I have was handed down from my husband's grandma Jan. And I've read it cover to cover. I can't even count how many times it's written in and marked up and drawn in. And around for my 50th birthday, I treated myself to an application to the Growing Edge retreat with the two of you, and had the immense pleasure of attending and drew the weekend. And throughout the weekend, what kept coming to the surface for me was, I want to write a book with Parker Palmer. And I think I might have even mentioned that, but then went home for the weekend and after the weekend, and then the pandemic happened, and I was still doing my morning drawing practice. I remember always hearing the quote about everyone has a book in them. And as I was going through my drawings one day, I realized that I had already done, 15 of Parker's quotes. And it hit me, well, maybe this is the book. Maybe this is my book. So I literally reached out to Parker and pitched the idea, and he said yes. And we started meeting over Zoom during the pandemic, which was a gift in itself. And yeah, I started working on the drawings, and it went from there. So it's been just a gift in so many ways.
Wow, that's so fascinating. I mean, how that hall came about. Thank you for kind of giving us a little bit of a roadmap there, that how it came about. Um, Parker, you know, how about you with the origins of that book? Let Your Life Speak. Can you just speak a little bit about the origins of the book, and then maybe a bit on your thoughts when Sherrill approached you about this project?
Sure. Well, let me just say it's such a delight to be with both of you tonight, two of my favorite people. And this book is a new favorite of mine, which I laid eyes on really in toto for the first time today. It's just a beautiful, beautiful little book. I'm jokingly telling the folks at InterVarsity Press that when I send it out as a gift to people, I'm going to say I'm sending you Mao Zedong's little red book of revolutionary ideas. But maybe I won't do that. We'll see. But Let Your Life Speak was really an accidental book. And as I'm listening to Sherrill's story, I'm realizing once again in life how many things depend on happy accidents, right? And how we get along with a little help from our friends. I had published in the late 90s, I think 97, The Courage to Teach. And that book took me 10 years to write, and I was kind of worn out with book writing. But my editor, another Sherrill, spelled differently, but Sherrill Fullerton, wonderful, wonderful editor and friend, said to me somewhere in 98, 99, do you have another book in you? And I said, I don't think so, certainly not right now. My tank is kind of empty. And she said, well, you have been giving speeches and writing essays for the last decade. Why don't we see if we can pull some of those together, and maybe you could write some new material, some connective material, and see what happens. And what happened was Let Your Life Speak, with Sherrill's midwifery, helping it along, and inspiring me to keep going, even though I didn't have a lot of gas in my tank. And it was a wonderful thing for me at that stage of my life, to look back over a decade and see what that journey had been like. Its highs and its lows, its insights, its wrestling matches, and its aspirations and hopes. It was really kind of a re-knitting of my life, and I expect that for you, Sherrill, this book has been something of the same, and will continue to be that way for you. So when a happy accident that Sherrill shows up at our retreat, Carrie, and not only shows up but participates deeply, and then when it's all over, quite to the surprise of all of us, she sent the group a graphic illustration of the whole flow of that weekend conversation, which was a beautiful thing to behold. I think that's probably on your website somewhere, Sherrill, or could be. And so when she approached me about the book, I knew something about Sherrill's interests and I knew something about her energy. And my main thought was, well, Parker, your only job here is to say yes and then get out of her way, which is what I tried to do. And we can tell more of that story later. But this is really Sherrill's work. I initially didn't want my name on the cover, but she and her editor convinced me to use a phrase like in collaboration with. But I must say that, the collaboration has just been a joy, the joy of conversation through the pandemic. And again, my abiding rule is just, if you're working with a good person, just get out of their way.
Well, you know, well, we'll get to more about the collaboration, but I first wanted to ask Sherrill, how did you choose the quotes? As I was looking through the book, because I got my copy today too, and I am so excited about it. But as I was reading it, when you sent me a draft, every quote is like, oh, I love that. Oh, I love that too. So how did you choose the quotes? And yeah, what was because well, as you said, some of them came about in that original, um, you know, write a meditative drawing every day. But there's more in this book than that.
Yeah. Yeah. So like I said, I've read it many, many times, and I bet you both know, and everyone listening knows, that books can mean different things to us at different times in our lives, and they speak differently to us depending what we're going through. And so each time I would read it through, I would leave my marks, underline passages, and a lot of times on the page I would find myself re-underlining or drawing in the margin to a line that I had already underlined. But I had gone every time through and underlined it. Actually, when I first submitted the proposal for the book, it was meant to be, I thought, meant to be an art book. And I thought, I'll just do 80 quotes and we'll just leave it at that, because for me, drawing isn't, and putting stuff on the internet, just showing people that part isn't as vulnerable for me. The writing part
Mm.
was very vulnerable. So I realized as I chose the quotes that I would be revealing a lot about what I was personally going through and why those quotes were really important to me. So yeah, I guess the choosing of the quotes, they kind of maybe chose themselves a bit. And again, they were ones that just kept coming to the surface as I read the book. So
Yeah, and um, I love the meditations, your reflections,
mhm.
and as it sounds like that was a challenge. That felt very vulnerable for you. And with each reflection, there's also a question
Mm,
for the reader to engage with the image, to engage with your thoughts about the quote in the image, and then to reflect a bit themselves. I really loved that format, but it sounds like the writing was a vulnerable process for you.
yeah, and actually, again, like I said, the book, I didn't intend it to be what it is today, and I'm so grateful that it is. And actually, Parker and I have mutual admiration for Sherrill Fullerton, because I connected with her in the process of submitting the book proposal. I had a couple no's, more than a couple no's from publishers. And so I had enough wherewithal to ask more about that for some feedback on why. And the book went from being an art book to being a blank journal. And then the no's were really around, yeah, blank journals don't really sell. And when I connected with Sherrill Fullerton, asked me another beautiful question. She said, Sherrill, how do you want people to engage with this book? What do you want them to do with this book? And that gave me pause. And it made me think about why I wrote the book and the books in my life that I engage with and how I engage with them. And obviously Let Your Life Speak was I love the phrase desert island book for me. And the way I engage with books like that and Mark Nepo's book, The Book of Awakening, is that I read them cover to cover. I write in them. I even put dates in them about what is, where I am at that point in my life when I'm reading it and why it resonates. And then when I'm done, I go right back to the beginning. And so books like that have become journals, diaries, meditations, kind of living books for me. And I said to Sherrill, that's what I want this book to be for people. And she said, well, then maybe it needs to be kind of a circle, just like your circle drawings. It can be your art and Parker's words, and then maybe a personal reflection about what those mean to you today or anytime. And then how about a question? And I remember thinking, oh, I love beautiful questions. Another friend, Krista Tippett, who, is the just height of beautiful question asker. So I dug into that. And that was the hard part for me. The art was the easy part. Well, not super easy, but the writing was the hard part because it became a place where I had to be real and like in the book, Parker, your true self. If you're gonna do it, jump in and make sure you're true about it. So yeah.
So Parker, then, you know, how did you see yourself being involved with the process? It sounds like there was a lot of conversation about the particular quotes, but also just about process and creative process. What was your role?
Well, I want to answer that question, Carrie. Thank you for it. But before I do, I want to just say a word about vulnerability, which Sherrill just
Mm-hmm.
talked about. And I know both you and I, Carrie, were paying close attention to that. People wrestle with vulnerability, and I understand that. In our culture, it ain't easy. But I find that it has one overarching virtue that is, for me, at my age, extremely powerful. By being vulnerable about at least certain parts of your life, including some of the difficult parts, you have a chance to show up in the world as who you really are. And I've said this 1,000 times, but I'll say it again. At age 84, it's very clear to me that there are painful ways to die, but I can't, spiritually and psychologically, I can't think of a more painful way to die than realizing that I spent all these years on earth without ever showing up with who I really am. Because ultimately, who I am is the only gift I have to give. And what I've learned from Let Your Life Speak is that chapters, for example, like the one I did on depression in that book called All the Way Down, have connected with people at moments and passages of suffering in their own lives, whether they have depression or they're close to someone who has depression. And these are important witnesses with which we encourage each other. It's, again, we get along with a little help from our friends. Maybe it's a cliche, but it's absolutely true. I love Sherrill's commentary. Um, for each of the quotes that she chose, she enriches them, she enlarges them, she translates them into what is another person's experience. So inevitably, there's a different frame on it. And I love that. To me, that has been one of the primary purposes of this book, is to engage people. Often I don't get to meet and talk with them, but to engage people in this conversation about life at some of its most fundamental and important levels we rarely talk about. People sometimes have come to me over the years and said, thank you for Let Your Life Speak. It saved my life. And I said, well, I appreciate the affirmation, but I didn't save your life. You saved your life by taking whatever words I left on those pages and interpreting them into a situation that I couldn't possibly have entered into myself. I don't have that much imagination to fully inhabit another person's skin. Now, Sherrill's going to have the same experience. People are going to be very, very helped by her art and her vulnerability and the choices that she made. So, as to how I interacted with Sherrill's creative process, I know this sounds simple-minded, but it's God's own truth. I just got out of the way. I, I had, I don't know. My life experience, I guess I'm very fortunate, privileged, blessed, lucky, whatever you want to call it, has left me with a lot of trust in good people who put themselves forward. And you can tell pretty quickly, um, you know, what you're dealing with. And when I run across a person like that, I just trust him to take the ball and run in a direction that I never would have thought of. But that's ultimately going to be a gift to the world. And that's exactly what Sherrill did. I mean, she's kind to say that on occasion during the pandemic, the Zoom calls we had, may have helped her think this through or think that through or nudge her this way or that way. But ultimately, she called all the shots. And I find her reflections marvelous. And the illustrations, of course, pop this stuff off the page, both my words and her words. And so this notion that this was a collaboration is true, but my part of that collaboration was largely finished by the year 2000. So, so I've kind of been on sabbatical for the last 22 years.
Oh, well, I've always said that as a songwriter, I'm a songwriter, that the finest compliment that someone can give me is to sing the song and hopefully make it their own, to interpret it with their experience. That's about the finest compliment I can think of as a songwriter. So Parker, it sounds like uh, that was a bit of your experience, was seeing, let your life speak um, through the lens of a fine graphic artist uh, and also author.
Yeah,
So
and one of the things you've taught me, Carrie, in our collaboration over the years is that everybody has a song to sing. So get out and sing it. It may not be musical or vocalized, but we all have a song to sing.
and Sherrill, I wanted to say something really about the graphic illustrations themselves. We had a conversation before this event about simple is not easy. Uh, sim- there's a simplicity on the other side of complexity, and that these drawings are are elegant, are truly elegant. Can you speak to that idea of an illustration that the clarity and elegance of doing a graphic illustration like this?
Yeah, I love that conversation, and that phrase stuck with me, Carrie, because I tend to think to myself, well, these are just little drawings that I do every day. But I realized after our conversation and through our conversation that they come easy to me, but I've practiced over and over at finding the essence of the words. And for me, that's what was such a beautiful experience with writing this book and illustrating this book, because some of Parker's words were hard, hard to find. I remember so many times saying to my husband when I was working on just the hand drawn ones, because I drew all the images by hand first in a sketchbook and then turned them into digital drawings. I remember so many times reading out loud the quote, Parker, and then just saying to my husband, oh my God, how am I going to draw that? Because a lot of them are abstract concepts or not literal. But what I love to do is just distill the essence of the words and then use as few lines and shapes and visuals as possible to still communicate that. Um, because I love the simplicity, the elegance of um, negative spaces, white spaces on the
Yeah.
page, And I think that when you remove something, sometimes there's beauty in that because it creates space to breathe in life and on the page.
There's such a great metaphor there. Parker, um, having seen uh, these words, the words from Let Your Life Speak, um, expressed in a whole new way. I mean, did it bring up any new insights for you on those words? I mean, they were your words and you wrote them at a certain point, but were there any new insights?
Well, yes, and the I have now today at noon for the first time the whole text in my hands, right, Cheryl?
Yes,
I didn't
we
have
all got our
access to.
copies today.
Yeah, I didn't have access to the entire text until just now. So, um, and so I haven't really had a chance to sit as you need to sit, visually with the art and with all of Cheryl's commentary. But although I've read quite a bit of it rather quickly this afternoon to prepare for this, and as I said, I love it. Um, I think what excites me, Carrie, is that one of the things we know these days is that a lot of people don't read books.
Mm.
Some of that I lament. It's like short attention span theater. It always blows me away to post maybe 150 words on Facebook about a contemporary issue on my author page, and then have a couple people write in and say, well, when they share it with friends, you should read this. It's awfully long, but you should read this. I'm thinking, like, long, you don't know long. That's a 60,000 word manuscript. But this is a a visual medium in which a lot of people are more comfortable than they are with words, and bless them for that. We have different forms of intelligence, right? Um, we have all kinds of intelligence that we don't honor nearly enough, and visual intelligence is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blessed to be married to a woman who's an artist, and she's done so much over the years to open my eyes to see the beauty in the world in new ways, to see light and shadow, um, and all kinds of textures and gradations of this and that that I otherwise would have missed. I'm actually at the point where the sun shining on the bark of a tree that has been stripped of its leaves is sometimes as beautiful as when all those gorgeous fall leaves were adorning its branches. And that, to me, that's like a new way of seeing, or one that has developed over the years. So I'm really, really glad for a book that will open itself to those ways of coming to this material. Again, graced by Cheryl's words, which I think have the strength and the virtue of being standalone, maybe half-page commentaries on a quote that in Let Your Life Speak was embedded in a whole chapter of words. And so the act of extracting those quotes is a creative act in itself. Like, what's the nub of this chapter? Um, and I think there are times when, as I critique my own writing, when I've said to myself, Parker, you could have just shut up about the rest of this and reach more people if you just cut to the chase, get to the point. But for better or worse, I'm not a get to the point guy. I'm more sort of on a ramble through life.
Well, and I loved how you both, um, approach these ideas, these similar ideas from your own lens, from your own creative, um, uh, how you love to write. Parker, you love to write in a particular kind of way, and Cheryl, you love to interpret ideas in a particular kind of way. So it was really fun to see how you both. I just wanted to be um, a fly on the wall for some of your conversations because I'm enjoying this so much right now. So, you know, it seems like it's been a real gift for both of you. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Like, what were the gifts of this?
Well, I'll grab that one. Parker, you were so gracious to showing up every time. And what I looked forward to was your humor, and your just sharing, the connection of just sharing what you were up to that day, whether it was a walk, a walk in your neighborhood, or having Mexican, or traveling to the Boundary Waters. Uh, I think when we show up and just share and listen to each other, that creates belonging and connection. And we, I know we both feel that there needs to be more of that in the world. So for me, it was a gift, to connect and hear your stories, of how the book developed, and just your just vast experiences, and the amazing people you've met and been able to work with and do just really good work with. So all of that has been such a gift.
Yeah, one of those people is the third person on this screen, the one who keep peppering us with questions. So I'm a lucky guy. Well, I had the same experience. I mean, I'm just a big believer in conversation. You a huge believer in conversation, because it's more than, when it's done thoughtfully and honestly, vulnerably, and well, it's more than just two people talking to each other. Um, it's the third thing that rises between them, that they co-create. And I think everything in life is co-creation. I I've never created anything by myself. It's always in dialogue with something or someone. Sometimes it's another person. Sometimes it's reading a book. Sometimes it's listening to one of Carrie's songs or some other great music. Sometimes it's a personal experience that I'm wrestling with. Like, how can I extract meaning from this profound darkness, which seems utterly meaningless? And so co-creation is just the rule of life. And it seems to me that anytime we have an opportunity to engage in co-creation with ourselves, our experiences, other people, the natural world, the literature, art, whatever, we should go for it. Martin Buber, a writer from whom I learned a lot over the years, once said a very simple thing. He said, all real living is meeting. All real living is meeting. And of course, because it's meeting the other, it's meeting whatever that thing is or that person is, that evokes from you something you didn't know was there. It's an experience that students often have when they talk about their great teachers. They always talk about, in meeting this teacher, I found something that I didn't even know I had, because somehow that teacher saw more in me than I saw in myself. Well, that's a gift of life. So go thou and co-create, I say.
Parker, I'm going to jump on that. I still am teaching elementary art, and I love that it's just access to little kids, being exuberant and joyful most of the time. There's 1% of the time when it's not all that joyful, but I talk with my students all the time about the fact that art can mean different things to us on different days, that visuals can be universal, and also that really a lot of art is just taking two things that already exist in the world and putting them together in a new way. And I feel like that's what this book has been. I also think too that just something I'm going to revisit what we had talked about earlier, Parker, when you shared in your book about vulnerably about your bouts with depression. As I was doing the daily drawings and sharing some of even the images that ended up in this book, I would post them online and people would reach out saying, oh my gosh, how did you know I needed to hear that today? Or for sure you drew that for me today, Sherrill. And I would laugh every time and always respond, no, really, this is just self-help, all of it. But what it brought to the surface for me is that we have our individual experiences can also be very universal because we're all, of the human race.
One of the things I want to lift up about both of your work um, is that right now, in a time when it's easy to feel divisions or where we're bumping up against one another, both of your work seems to create this really welcoming space. That you're taking both, let your life speak, stepped very courageously and vulnerably into a safe space for someone to meet them there. And I feel like this, as I was looking through the book today, I had that same sense of you courageously taking that first step into a safe space, inviting someone to step in there with you. Um, I guess I'm just wondering, what's your hopes for this book? If I could say, if you could say, what do I hope um, that folks might take away from this book, or how they might engage with this book, or even change a reader's experience of Let Your Life Speak.
Yeah, I would be most honored if the book ended up being battered and beaten up and shared and written in and drawn in and dog-eared. Um, but I think there's several ways that the book could be in the world. I think it could be a daily meditation. I think it could be a journal prompt. I think it could be used in a conversation, reading together with a friend and seeing, because again, we all have individual experiences. One person's reading of it or understanding or answering of the question or the generative question would be totally different. And that's the beauty of it. Yeah, I hope that it finds many different uses. I think those are just a few.
And for me, Carrie, I share, excuse me, everything that Sherrill just said. I just want to share one other thought that came to me as you two have been talking about this. So once in a Quaker meeting years ago, I heard a woman say something that has stayed with me ever since. She rose out of the silence and said, we all think that we can, that the way to get together as human beings is to go to the highest level of abstraction we can find, politically, theologically, whatever. And that somehow up there are these kind of abstract ideas that will allow us to join together. And she said, of course, also up there, there's not enough oxygen to breathe. So life can't be sustained up there. And she says, in fact, it works the other way. The way we find unity is to each dig deep enough into the well of our own experience. That was her image, the well of our own experience, that we start to draw on the living water that feeds all the wells. That's where we find human unity. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend, because I try not to pretend, that that's an easy thing to do politically these days. I mean, my honest belief is that some wells are poisoned. And I even think I know where some of that poison is coming from. And we have water reclamation projects to do, I do believe. But ultimately, I don't see any other answer than to try to get down to that level of shared human experience, compared to which our differences in political ideologies are in fact on the surface. When you get right down to the nitty gritty of living and dying, of suffering, tragedy, and of rising up in hope. Um, I mean, that's a level of life that every human being participates in. And it's a huge sadness that we're being manipulated by forces that want to muddy all that for the sake of divide and conquer. Um, so, my hope for books like this is that they will somehow contribute to getting down to the groundwater that feeds all the wells as we are willing to share our life experience around those fundamentals.
Well said, Parker. I think too that, when you get up close and you dig down deep and you hear another person's story, really listen to a story, there's always common ground if you can listen hard enough.
Well, unfortunately, I could listen to you two talk about these topics like for another 5 hours, But I know
But
that
Carrie, that would take me past Quaker midnight.
That's my
10
bedtime
p.m.
too, Parker.
10 p.m. is Quaker midnight for those who don't know.
Yeah. Well, so we don't go beyond Quaker midnight.
Right.
I know that we did want to get to some question and answers that I know folks who are listening. I've been watching the chat a little bit, and there are just some beautiful comments happening in the chat. So we'd love to open it up to um, asking questions, Sherrill or Parker or both, and I'll be kind of um, reading some of those questions and then passing them to you to the both of you.
Excellent. And I think Lori at IVP is also going to be grabbing those from the chat and sharing those with us. So if you're listening and you're here and you'd want to drop a question in the chat, that would be great. Oh, Barbara, I see your question. Yes, in fact, we were going to do that at the end, but I could do it now, I guess.
And some of the slides at the beginning were
Yeah.
also from the book.
Yes.
What is the question, Sherrill?
The question said, can you show us a page or two of the book? So I'm going to just flip a couple pages, and then I think I'll read one of the images, one of the reflections at the end. But the book, it has the images on the right, and then the reflection and the questions. So I'll just look through a couple.
Actually, it's on my left, but whatever.
Oh, sorry, on your left. All right, mirror.
Well, we have a question over here. Sherrill, how would you encourage reluctant drawers to begin? So, drawing for the terrified.
I like that interpretation, Carrie. I'm going to go back to my teaching, just what I do with littles. I literally say, just make a mark. Make a mark. I usually lower the stakes immensely. So if you can at all, lower the stakes and the pressure. Just get a sketchbook, or even just use paper that, the back of the napkin, so that it doesn't matter. And start small, literally start doodling, moving your pencil on a paper. And then find what you like, what you're drawn to. Maybe it's seriously your cup of coffee sitting on the counter in front of you at 5 a.m, or maybe it's a favorite cartoon character. So start small and start with something that you do daily. It is a form of practice. So if you practice anything, sport, instrument, drawing, you'll get better.
Well, there's a question from Judy. Judy, to Parker, as a word person, would you say something about how the images might have opened doors for you?
Well, as I said earlier, I've just today had a chance to see the whole range of images and interactions with words, and I already have a sense that that will be happening. This is my first look at the entire manuscript, because I really did want to get out of Sherrill's way. I didn't want sort of a hint of any sort of editorial power over what she was writing, and I know how it is as a writer. Um, to to feel like you have eyes over your shoulder, and how important it is to for that not to happen. This is your work, this is your creativity, and I wanted to fully honor that principle. So maybe we'll do another webinar down the road where I can talk about what's opened up for me through the images. But I think my first hot take, I think that's what they call it these days. I think that's not a bad phrase, right? Hot
No.
take. I think my first hot take is how amazing it is that a simple illustration of the sort Sherrill majors in can really open up words and give you a gut feeling of, okay, I get this message, and I'm glad for it. Isn't I mean, I guess that's the reason why our traffic signs aren't heavy on language, right? We don't want people sitting there trying to puzzle out what this sign is trying to tell them at 70 miles an hour. We just want to know there's a sharp turn ahead, and you should proceed accordingly. So yeah, so I'll have more to say down the road, I'm sure.
I love that idea, Parker. I think it would be really fun to get on after the book, is out there and people have a chance to read it. One thing that I think would be interesting too, when we talked about how it might be used in the world, even just, I find I've done this myself, like just looking at an image first to see what it brings up for me without any words, and then introducing the words to it and journaling on that, or and just realizing like, now when I put the two together, how does that change how I interact with it and what comes up for me. So I think it would be really a fun way to explore the book together, pick
Yeah,
so many images.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a question here, um, one for Parker and one for Sherrill. Parker, if you were to write Let Your Life Speak today, what might it say or would you write about that you didn't write about 20 years ago? And Sherrill, were there any quotes left on the cutting room floor?
Well, such a big question because a lot has happened since 1999 or 2000, that I don't need to tell folks about. I think one of my biggest concerns, and I've written about this in other places, is how many people in our society have been left with what I call the experience of the empty self. That's something I know something about through my deep dives into clinical depression that I wrote about in Let Your Life Speak. But I think I would add a section about the pathologies that come from the empty self, which then cries out to be filled with something that will give it a sense of identity or connection with something larger in the universe. And now I just used language that a lot of people would associate with good things, like a connection to the divine. But let's not forget that Nazi Germany and the Holocaust were about filling the empty self with a connection to something larger than the ego, which was Aryan supremacy and all the evil that that led to. And so I would write about on our own personal journeys and in our institutions, in our religious institutions, in our educational institutions, wherever we have a chance to help people fill the self with nourishing, honest, truthful, life-giving content rather than the pathogens that so many are vulnerable to today. Um, yeah, that's one thing I'd certainly add. There's a whole bunch of others.
Well, Parker, I'd love to read Let Your Life Speak too. um, but Carrie, the question about images on the cutting room floor, I think there were only 3 or 4 that didn't make it, just because of length, and we wanted to keep the book very similar to Let Your Life Speak in size. And I really am so excited for it. When I first started talking with InterVarsity Press, my great publisher, they had visions of a smaller book, and I pushed really pretty firmly wanting it to be the same size, because really another hope of mine is that it uplifts and amplifies Parker's work in Let Your Life Speak, which has been such an influential book for so many people. And I think, like Parker said, using the visuals is just kind of another on-ramp for people to access and understand and make meaning from his words and my art in another way. So yeah.
I have a question here. Have you thought about in your envisioning and creating of this book? Um, have you thought about how this book might be used in a classroom or a workshop?
Hmm. Well, again, I'm a teacher at heart, so a little bit. I think 2 ways it could be used. It could certainly be used just conversationally in a workshop about true self. It could be used in a workshop, in that workshop, even making marks and encouraging people to find words that have such meaning for them personally, whether it's one of their favorite books or using Let Your Life Speak, and encouraging drawing and art making. I also think it could be used. Uh, yeah, I think an art making workshop, and just a conversational connecting workshop and about true self are 2 ways.
Well, I know, again, uh, if we're going to end before Quaker midnight, um, that these are fabulous questions, and again, we could continue for a long time with these really thoughtful questions. Um, but I think we're at the point where we might need to be thinking about closing the circle. And Sherrill, thank you again for inviting me to be part of this conversation. It's been so fun for me. So, um, uh, do you have words for everyone, or something you'd like to invite us to do before we close tonight?
I do. First of all, thank you, Carrie and Parker, for being here to have this conversation. I've been looking forward to it, and I'm so excited for this to be the kickoff of Heart Speak making its way into the world. So I have 2 things I'd like to do to wrap up. The first is called a chat waterfall, and actually, I think I'll reverse it. I'm gonna do a wing call like a different play. I'm gonna read one of my favorite images from the book, show you and read it. And I think, Lori, if you took that screenshot, you could share with everyone. All right. So this is actually one of the first images in the book, and it says, "Before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you." And the reflection goes like this: making time and space to truly listen for the life that wants to emerge is not selfish or wasteful. It is how I begin to acknowledge the more meaningful and true life that I may not even have words to describe just yet. Being open to surprise and wonder, even expecting them to show up, is a way to adventure into a new day. When I wonder what delightful connection or simple, ordinary beauty I will experience today, I find that I am more intentional about seeking joy in small moments. So the question says, when have you been surprised by a beautiful moment? Recall the moment and what it meant to you. So I'm not going to have you answer that, but what I think we'll end with, in a moment, is as I said, a chat waterfall. Before I give you the directions, I want to just thank IVP for making all of this happen, to Lori Neff for being our gracious host, and again to Parker and Carrie for being here in conversation. And finally, to all of you for joining us today. It's meant so much, and it feels just right. This felt just right for the book. So I'd like you, on the count of three, to drop a word in the chat that you feel your heart is speaking to you today, whatever that might be. And like I tell my students, there's no wrong answer. So if you could do that, 1, 2, 3. And then everyone just take in. Oh. Grateful, joy, hope, gratitude, peace. So this is my hope for the book in the world.
That's a wonderful answer. Wonderful bunch of answers.
Yes. Oh, I love, and the waterfall's still going. I love it.
So if you know how to save the chat, you're welcome to just save all those words, which is so affirming. Thank you, June. And I will send us off then. I hope that you all check out the book, share it with a friend, figure out a time to get together and talk about it once it's in the world. And
May the
Carrie,
book
we'd
and
love
its author flourish.
Yes. And a deep bow to both of you.
Thanks so much. Be well, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.